McGowan is here. I'm Joe Carducci, and I have chills right now. Thank you all so much for being here. We have a photo that we can't figure out how to share with all of you, but I was inspired to have this conversation with this incredible panel of badasses because we have a picture that we took together in the simpler or decent times at the end of 2024, where we were all together at the White House, and there was some reverie and some smiling, and I wanted to gather together to reflect on that and where we are now. And I just want to have you guys all talk to each other. I will talk to all of you, but if anybody just wants to jump in, first of all, welcome. And there's the picture. Thank you. Look at us, so high tech
and so beautiful.
Yes, and it was December of 2024, a million trillion years ago, light years ago. But just jump in. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is incredible. I'm so fucking proud.
I feel like all of the fear that I feel and anxiety has literally slipped away, and I'm in this little wormhole tunnel with these incredible women, and I feel more calm, I think, than I have in a very long time, just because I'm in the same room with you all. This is fantastic.
I think the thing, Dana, that you're saying is exactly right. And I think that's why people talk so much about having community, right? That you're supposed to be with people who aren't, who want to make change, or who are interested in the same things as you, or who are following the same path as you, because this is exactly the thing. I mean, if we're by ourselves on our phone or reading the news these days, I mean, it can feel absolutely demoralizing to even try and get out of bed in the morning. And then seeing all your little faces. I mean, this is amazing. When we were together at the White House, as Joe was saying, we were like, well, these were the good old days, and we're living through them right now. And I said, yeah, let's be here before they put huge banners of Donald Trump's face everywhere. And they literally just put a huge banner of Donald Trump's face in D.C. Sadly, everything that we thought might come to pass has already come to pass.
Yeah, and faster than I think any of us thought it was going to.
And this is also in service, not just of community, but of something I've been working on. I've been kind of working on a little, maybe a podcast, an idea called Steal the Air, where we all pick up a microphone and we all use our voices, tell our stories, talk about our lived experiences, and come at the news and journalism in an independent way with that passion and with those lived experiences. And I know Heather has also been talking about this as well, about lifting up voices and getting them out there. And I remember when we took that photo, and Heather, you said to me, you turned around, it was very loud, it was a big Christmas party, and you said, we need to put our voices together in the next 4 years. We need to come together, and we need to do this together. And I was interested to hear maybe a little bit more about that and that idea from Heather.
Well, so, my big thing has always been taking up oxygen. That is, whoever takes up the most oxygen gets the most attention. And one of the things right now that really jumps out to me is it sure feels like the people who are associated with the Trump administration are frightened. They are grabbing as much power as they possibly can because it feels so fragile and as if it's slipping away from them. But it almost feels like, weirdly, like they're being pushed off to the side. All the American people are stepping up and trying to define what we want. And that's so exciting, because my thing has always been about getting ordinary people to recognize that it's their government, and watching people start to step up and to say, as we've been saying, we are America. I am an American, and what I want matters. You kind of think it's of what we could define in the next few years. It's pretty exciting.
I agree.
I agree 100%. And I love the idea of community and taking up the oxygen. And I wonder what you would say to people who are like, there's just too much shit. It's flooding the zone with shit. There's too much shit. I can't get the attention. I can't cut through all that noise. What would you say to people? How do you do it? How can regular people approach doing that? Because that's one of the issues where we see stuff that's so fucking important, just getting lost in the never-ending news cycle.
Well, I can jump in here. I think we need to curate our news feeds and how we get the news. I subscribe to all of y'all's Substacks. What we do, what Dana and I do on the Daily Beans, is we sift through the pile of absolute garbage.
Man, it's a big pile.
Pick out the important headlines, all the news that is fit to swear about, and share it in a way that is digestible, that doesn't make you full of anxiety and rage and fear. It's not like the clickbait headlines and the Scott Jenningses. And by the way, Lee, you do a fantastic job taking him down.
Amen to that.
Just all that, and we present it in a way. And then we wrap up with listener submitted good news, which brings us back to the community aspect of it. And so that's kind of how Dana and I tackle this.
Can I ask you about that, though? Because, of course, I read you. How do you figure out what to write about, and how do you untangle it? Because you produce a ton of material.
There's a lot, but mainly by spending time on social media and in groups and in community, hearing about what people want to hear about, mainly what's going on with the autocracy and this current regime, and sending to have those released, kind of getting people against privatization of all of our government agencies, whether it's prisons or schools or police or whatever. And I think I have a pretty good sense of what people are interested in hearing and talking about, and from that sort of baseline is how I kind of decide which news stories I put out, and I always make sure to put some good news stories.
I was just going to say, I think with the podcast, we've done a good job of balancing, because yes, there's so much shit going on, there's so much awfulness going on, but there's still good things happening, and those stories have to be told, or we're going to lose hope. I mean, whether it's Pritzker in Illinois opening the first LGBTQ hotline that is public to the public, or if it's supporting healthcare for the trans community, as loud as this other side is, we try very hard to echo some of the good things that are happening. Heather, your newsletter, your daily thing that you've put, what we're living through fascism right now, the only thing I can say is every once in a while your newsletter starts off with, "This one's not going to be pretty," and I'm like, "Oh shit."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all of you do so effectively, by the way, and it's just amazing. And you take a different approach to it, each of you, but you also communicate in a way that people honestly and truly understand. Yeah. Where you're not talking at anyone, you're having a conversation with them. And I think that's part of the reason why you all resonate so much with what people are going through right now. And I can't thank you enough for that, because I think a lot of people have unplugged and they felt like talked down to or talked above in a way that they're like, that's not for me. But that is not what any of you did.
And I think Allison made a really good point when she said that she and Dana look through the news stories, because I do the same thing. And you start looking for the things that, if I don't understand something exactly, I am definitely not alone. So then I will go research that thing so that I understand it. Then once I understand it, then I can better explain it to other people. And I do that on purpose, because I figure like none of us are ever alone. So if you're feeling confused about something, it's most likely that help people to stay confused, and then they feed into fear and negativity and hate because it works, and people don't know the difference anymore. And so I try really hard to help people recognize the difference, because I'm astounded daily that people aren't up in arms about there being people armed in our streets. I'm astounded daily that we're just literally covering up a giant up to the president of the United States. And that is because the right-wing ecosphere is so strong and so effective that they have allowed people to miss the major story. So I think that the work that people do to try and sift through everything and keep bringing it back to the things that people actually need to know, and then tell them in a way that they can actually understand.
I'm wondering if a question for everybody, because this is true for me, and I'm wondering if it's true for y'all, in the way that everybody here is just so amazing at sharing better by teaching things and explaining things to others. That's like my learning style. And I've noticed that if I research something, like you said, Lee, but then share it with everyone in a way that kind of, isn't awful and anxiety ridden, then that helps me learn it more. Is that the same experience for the rest of you?
It takes some of the power out of it. You know what I mean? Because when you take that fear of the unknown out of something that you don't understand, for me anyway, that actually, you're right. I hadn't really thought about it in that in terms of it being sort of cathartic or removing some of that fear and apprehension because I don't understand something. So when others, it helps take some of that power away from me. That's something that I hadn't really put together until you said that. But yeah, I would say that for me, it's helpful.
100%. That's, one of the reasons I write every single day is if I don't understand it, I feel completely lost.
Yeah.
But if I do learn about it and understand it, then no matter how dire it is, how to move forward. And that's one of the things that I think we're all dancing around is that by hiding so much of what this administration is doing, the thing that jumps out to me are these detention camps. It's very, very difficult to get information about them. It's difficult to get information about the Epstein files. It's difficult to get information about the things that the administration does not want you to know about, like what's happened, the stories, and make it transparent so that people understand what's going on. But really, it all comes down to the idea that's been around forever, that knowledge is power. And if you understand what's happening, you have power. And if you don't, you're manipulable by things like fear. And that, the heart of a democracy versus fascism is who has control over knowledge.
That's why it's such a disaster. Sorry, I was just saying that's why it's such a disaster that 6 companies own all of our major broadcasting networks. It's one of the reasons that I go on CNN as much as I do, because I feel like the truth deserves a fighting chance, and that shouldn't be the case on a major broadcasting network. But like you guys were saying, like I end up across the table from people like Scott Jennings, who is straight up lying to the American people. And I find that very hard to take. There are some conservative pundits on these networks that I think are doing a bit. They understand what they're doing and they are just taking the counterpoint. And then there's people who are true believers who don't care if they are lying straight to the American public's face. And I remember fighting with Scott directly on Abby Phillips' show, maybe in January. And I said, well, what do we do if Trump sends the military into blue states to keep them in line, to keep them under control? How outrageous! That would never happen. You should not allow her to say that. And I thought, oh, this reaction means he knows what's up. And this is the plan. And I know that I thought Trump would at least, put the Insurrection Act out there and tell us we were at war before he did it. But he didn't even bother to do that. And every time I see the military being sent to another American city, I think about that conversation we had, because he was like, we're in the fever swamps, Abby, make her stop talking. And I was entirely right. And I think, how do you go on TV every day and lie to the American people so blatantly and not expect them to believe you and have no responsibility for that? And I think that's really trying.
That part is
you must have the vapors, Lee.
That part is also terrifying for me. I think that's the scariest part of how many people know what is happening in this country and have turned a blind eye. I listened to an interview with Kamala, I think it was on Colbert, and she said the actions that they're taking is not what surprises her. It's the capitulation. They're back, and when we don't see anything, you know who you're protecting. You know what is happening to the most vulnerable in this country, and it doesn't seem to keep you up at night. All of the smiles on the military and the law enforcement that are hurting people, innocent people in this country, with a smile on their face. I'm sure there's people that are having to follow directive because that's what they're supposed to do and not be happy about it. But some of these people are a little too joyful about breaking the Constitution right
Heather,
now. That bothers me a lot.
Heather wrote a lot about the law firms that were capitulating and the media networks and that kind of thing. What do you think about that?
Well, I do think, for me, I always try and remember that there isn't one Trump entity.
Right.
MAGA was always a bunch of different groups nailed together. And, we do have the absolute sadists who are just, the ones running the Department of Homeland Security social media account, for example, which is just vile. It's just vile. And we do have people, obviously, who are enjoying that role. But, what really surprised me more than that is perhaps what the former vice president was saying is I really expected that at least some Republican senators would protect the prerogatives of the Senate. Yeah. And I think that they should expect extraordinary cowardice in that it seems to me anyway that they've been hoping the courts would take care of things. And in fact, the courts have done a pretty good job, except the Supreme Court keeps overturning them. And I'm going to be really interested in what happens when we go back in September, when it is no longer possible, I think, for the Republicans who are not MAGA in the Senate and even the ones who are in the House of Representatives to pretend like this is all going to go away. When Trump starts to threaten the Fed and starts to suggest that he's going to take monetary policy into his own hands, when the economy is in the kind of difficult straits it looks like it's in, when the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, says he is going to ignore a court order to close a detention center in the Everglades, the push is coming to shove here. And it's not clear to me at all which way they're going to jump, in part because Trump is falling apart.
Yeah.
Are they going to continue to back this dude who is not going to be able to function much longer?
Yeah, Heather, I want to piggyback on what you're saying about the Fed. We know that on the emergency docket, this particular Supreme Court, the conservative majority, in the Gwen Wilcox, Kathy Harris, National Labor Relations Board, Merit Systems Protection Board case, said Humphrey's executor is done. The president's allowed to fire whatever member of multi-member boards that they want, except the Fed. The Fed is special. The Fed is different. And it's not. But I feel like what they're doing to us is moving everything so far to one side that when it comes back a little bit and said, no, he can't do this to the Fed, but he can do it to the FTC and the NLRB, that we're supposed to be happy about that. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe. I mean, the one of the things we started out by saying is that things look worse than we expected them to. I'm not sure about that. I was really very, very concerned much earlier than perhaps I let on. But one of the things that's happened is people are feeling the heavy hand of a man who increasingly looks mentally incapacitated. And they're not liking what they're seeing. His numbers are completely underwater. And now they're obviously trying to argue that we need a dictator to take care of the crime that he is inventing in his own head. And, I was thinking about this before we did this. I was actually out on the water and I thought, I hate that expression that sometimes people have to touch the stove, but it feels a little bit like America has touched the stove. And the number of times you read people saying, oh, I had no idea he was going to cut Medicaid. I had no idea we were going to lose pieces of Medicare. I had no idea that the tariffs were going to send prices up. And the resistance to that might be better, I think, going forward than we thought it would be.
Which is why they're trying to gerrymander states.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask you that very question, right? So I was going to ask that, what you guys think, because what I feel all the time is there are not going to be midterms. You're delusional if you think that there's going to even be a midterm, or if there are midterms, they'll be gerrymandered to the point where they're not free and fair. I mean, all of you, please just weigh in on what do you say? How do you answer that question? What do you say about what Newsom is doing, what Hochul is talking about doing, what Maryland potentially could do, but what Texas just did as well?
My thing on this is that, and please someone correct me who knows more about the law than I do. California seems to be the only state right now, not saying New York, that is actually following the legislature and following our Constitution. They're following the law. A lot of other states like Texas did not leave it up to the voters. They took power, they grabbed power, and so there are lawsuits happening that they are going to lose. It'll be really interesting to see if all of these red states that are not putting it up to a vote end up getting blocked, and the blue state like California, who actually followed the chain of command, that it's allowed to go through. I'm going to be really interested to see what happens.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's going to be an all or none situation, and it may be none, but that'll be interesting to square with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act that they've been participating in since 2013. Yeah. But as a Californian, I'm all for my whole life. Ever since what happened to me in the military happened to me, the military sexual trauma, every time I punched back, people were like, "You're out of line," not the person who attacked me. And that's what I feel like the Texas-California fight is. Texas is assaulting voting rights. California is punching back. That is self-defense. I get so angry, and I have, because of this in my PTSD, I have this like super developed sense of justice, or lack thereof, where it doesn't exist. But like, if I'm not allowed to kick my rapist in the nuts, then what the hell are we even doing? And so that's kind of how I feel about this gerrymandering. I know that's like a weird connection, but I think the whole country is going through sort of a social trauma right now. And I think that to bring it back to why we share the news and why we need to learn the news. The reason I dig into it so much is because I think that knowledge is the enemy of anxiety. And if I know everything, and if I know all these things, then maybe I'm not so shocked about what is happening next. I mean, it's horrible, but maybe, I'm expecting fireworks on the 4th of July, for example, but not on August 12th. So they startle me. And so I think that might be one of the reasons I dig in so deep and shout so loudly.
It's a great analogy. I think you're right. I think knowledge right now is power to calm our nervous systems so that we know what's happening. We don't always know what's coming. This is all a crapshoot because, like you said, they go as far as they can to one side. And if the court says you can't do that, they settle on something that's still horrifying, but apparently not as illegal.
And your analogy is also quite literal. As a survivor as well, what we're seeing is the brutal truth is simple. In Donald Trump's America, predators are protected and survivors are erased. And the predators are being rewarded with the highest levels of power. You see this, I often say this fish rots from the head down. And what we are looking at as women, as parents, as human beings, is very, very difficult, Allison. Your analogy really hits hard because it's figurative, it's emotional, it's literal, it's physiological, it's physical. And with this Epstein case in particular, watching him evade accountability, watching them continue to erase the victims, the survivors, and leaning into Ghislaine Maxwell being the truth teller, rewarding her, Allison, with maybe a work release, which I was really trying to dig into what you were writing about that, but it does feel disheartening to see how these predators have been rewarded through all of this.
Yeah. Well, I was the first to report that her sex offender status was waived. I had those screenshots of her point screen from the Bureau of Prisons. And then I was the first to show her out custody status, which normally allows you to work outside the walls of the prisons. Of course, there were a couple of mainstream media outlets who ran the story 5 hours later, and they don't like to credit independent media.
Right.
But it's not about the who is getting credit. I thought it was important to get that story out, which brings us back to community. My sources aren't high-level Trump administration officials that I'm trying to maintain access to. My sources are the frontline people working in the federal government or who have worked in the federal government that want to push back on what's happening to their institutions and their organizations. And those patriots are the ones who trust us as independent journalists with the information, who want to get it out there but can't because of potential retribution. And I think that community is a very, very strong community. And that's why I always continue to tell their stories.
I will also say something that resonated with me. Obviously, Allison, your story is so personal and so traumatic. But this idea that if I'm not allowed to kick my rapist in the nuts, what are we doing here? That kind of, even if it's physical, real life, or metaphoric. I think that's what's resonating with people with California right now. This feeling of actually kicking back, that we don't just need to be passive victims while our democracy is destroyed. I think it's why we need to keep pressure on other blue state governors to kind of do the same thing. My guess is politically, they are waiting for another state to do it. If I was Westmore, I was JB Pritzker, I was whatever, Gavin's getting his time in the sun right now. I think politics is politics. I think Gavin's doing a great job. His social media team are obviously gifted. They are trolling Trump in a way that I think is so fascinating because they're just right up. Fox News they're just right in their head every single day.
By the way,
I know a woman, but it's also like the way they're like, this is unbelievable. No leader, no governor should speak like this. And you're like, have we lost the plot completely? He's just holding a mirror to you guys. my hope is that if another state, if Oklahoma, if Indiana or somebody else decides that they are going to gerrymander, then all of a sudden you have Illinois saying, fine, we'll do it too. So that so it all feels like a reaction to the Republicans' overstep, as opposed to what a lot of Republicans who aren't paying attention think the Democrats did it first and we're just fighting back, which is of course the complete opposite. But I can see that maybe some of these blue state governors are waiting for their opportunity to do what Gavin did in response to Texas. And I think that we do need to be kicking back a lot more. I think that's what people are responding to. And I think it's really interesting staring at your five faces right now. It's like, it's going to be women. At the end of the day, it's going to be women. You know, we're the ones whose rights are being taken away. We're the ones who are going to suffer. We're the ones that they want back in the kitchen. We're the ones they're talking about taking our vote from. So at the end of the day, I hope men join us. I do. But I'm less interested in the epidemics that have to do with men and more interested in the rights that are being taken from women.
Mm-hmm. I will point out that today is the anniversary of the 19th Amendment being added to the Constitution. That's the one that protects women's right to vote. You know, at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is power. And in fact, we have had a system in the United States for at least the last 40 years that concentrates power among a very small group of people who are overwhelmingly white men. And the trick going forward is going to be to keep political pressure on not just the Democrats, but certainly red states as well, the lawmakers in those states, to make them more afraid of the voters than they currently are of the MAGAs. And, you know, I do think that is an option at this point, because as I say, if Trump cannot finish his term, that gives us J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance is not popular. You know, is he going to be able to pick up the MAGAs? I don't know. Maybe. They're obviously clearly already working on that. You can see him standing behind Trump at all these events. And I don't know if you saw this, but Elon Musk has backed away from his threat to have another party and is instead working on boosting J.D. Vance. They're clearly trying to do that. Is it going to work? I mean, J.D. Vance has the personality of a cactus, and that might be.
Cactuses are cuter.
That's right. Exactly. But so now if the American people really say, as they have said to pollsters, that not only do they not like the MAGA Republicans, they also don't like gerrymandering. Republicans don't like gerrymandering. Nobody likes the idea that a legislature overrides what a petition will do in a state like Utah, for example, or Missouri, so or Florida. So, you know, I'm really hoping that we push back on this longstanding idea that the government should be rigged for a few very wealthy, primarily white men, and put the screws to people now to say, we don't want advantages. We want fairness. We want justice. We want what is in the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. We are not the radical extremists that are currently literally sitting in the White House suggesting that America wants a dictator.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's kind of goes back to like, if everyone's using steroids and you're saying, well, steroids shouldn't be allowed, so I'm not going to use them, and you keep losing the races, at some point, if the rules are made by the person who wins, you take steroids too, you win your race because you were always a faster runner, always had the better ideas, was where we are. And then you say, okay, no steroids for anybody. Like if we're all doing it, let's keep it in mind. I keep saying that if politics used to be a war of words and then it became like a boxing match, it's now a UFC cage fighting, right? And if we're going to keep getting kicked in the head, we can't keep saying those aren't the rules. That's not fair. We have to be like, okay, we have to adjust. If the referee is not going to call this as unfair, then we better learn to kick. And I think that's where we're at. And it goes back to Allison's metaphor as well.
It's been very frustrating for a lot of people. It's just been very frustrating. The feedback I've gotten is, where are the Democrats? Where's the fight? Right? Like, we've heard a lot of that until Texas and the Democrats, what they did there, and Newsom and Pritzker. And it's starting to feel like a lot of people are seeing their fighters showing up. And it's terrifying how long it took. But I think, to everyone's point, that it is starting to shift for sure.
It's starting to shift at the state level. I'm concerned about the federal government, the leadership in the federal government.
And every once in a while, we get a little bit of courage from a red state governor, from Virginia, saying, no, we're not sending troops to D.C.
Vermont.
emergency in DC. And I think every time a red state, anything stands up against this administration, it gives other people somehow permission to find their spine in some small way. So I don't want to say grateful for them doing the bare minimum and doing their jobs, but in the world we're living in right now, it is nice when one of them pushes back.
Yeah, and that's what I think is, it gives a permission structure. The whole reason we're having the Epstein files fight is because the MAGA people wanted it. They brought it up to and that gave the mainstream media permission to go after it full bore. But we've had a lot of really great fights. The California one is happening now when our elected leaders in Congress, the Democrats in the House, just started adding Epstein amendments to every single bill until Mike Johnson had to send everybody home.
Never at home.
That was fantastic. When Van Hollen went down to meet and talk with Mr. Abrego, Van Hollen's surprising the heck out of me. We do see a lot of fight, and we have to pick that up. We have to elevate it. We have to congratulate people when they do that. We have to give them their flowers for that. And it is also okay to complain or, to speak up against somebody who's not doing probably the best job. Because we did that with Newsom, for example, when he was having Charlie Kirk and Bannon on his show and throwing our trans friends under the bus. We all spoke up and spoke out, and he hired that amazing woman to run his team and has shifted course because he can read the room. Now, if everybody would just start reading the room, we would be, I think, a lot better off.
How about we listen to the women too a little bit more, right?
But, that's what I'm really, it brings me a lot of hope. And I also, all the language around you're going to hear a lot of language around the 19th Amendment that they gave women the right to vote. That's not what happened. Women got the right to vote. Yeah. We did that. They're using this weird passive voice. They do it on purpose. And then something else I wanted to bring up too, that I think is kind of important to understand. A lot of folks are talking about the militarization and the putting the troops against U.S. citizens. I mean, full stop. That's fascism. A lot of folks are saying that that there are people who were pardoned from January 6th that are joining ICE or being recruited by ICE. And I just want to make the point that you don't have to have been at the Capitol on January 6th to be an awful, horrible human being. There are plenty of terrible, sadist, bigoted jerks they've been recruiting those type of people in our police forces for a very long time. It's not new. And so I would encourage anybody listening to not be so concerned about whether that person just happened to be there on January 6th or not. It's the entirety and of the entirety of the recruiting process and the militarization of the police, but also the fact that Donald Trump is just sending them. And you can't just resign from the National Guard, for example. A lot of these folks are people with families and jobs, that are now being taken away from their families and put on the streets of DC. And so while I'm totally 100% down with Sandwich Guy, I love that guy. But that was, HSI, I think he was throwing that sandwich at. I don't think that a lot of our National Guard and our troops want to be there, and polls are showing that. And these aren't unlawful orders, at least not yet litigated by this particular Supreme Court. But man, there's a lot of jerks out there, and they recruit for them.
Yeah, but let's also add on that ICE is having a hard time recruiting.
Yes, they are.
Everything we're doing.
So, so we're in this funny place. It always seems to me that we've got this administration that is clearly trying to institute authoritarianism and or fascism. I used to put brakes on over fascism because of the economic aspects of fascism that Trump was not doing. Now he is doing those as well. So you've got these people who are doing everything they can to assert this authoritarianism or fascism in the United States of America. But if you get like 3 inches deep, there's a huge amount of resistance to that. It's really not taking off. And so the trick is to hold both of those things in your head and recognize that you got to push behind the latter to resist the former, but not to be discouraged by just looking at, Trump saying, yeah, people want a dictator, because they clearly don't, or they wouldn't need to be having these huge bonuses for ICE or trying to cannibalize the civil workers in the Department of Defense or whatever they're trying to do to build those numbers, extend the age limits for being an ICE agent. So we're in this funny time where you have to hold two completely contradictory things in your head at the same time. And every day I feel like I'm trying to figure out which way the teeter-totter is balancing on that particular day.
Yeah, we have less than 10 minutes left, and I want to sort of wrap, for our audience and for everybody to have a chance to sort of share a closing thought. But to that point, Heather, I was thinking about a David Frum quote from, I think, the day that the Bolton raid took place, where he said, today was a good example of the human ability to get used to anything. And I wonder about all of your perspectives on that, because, it kind of picks up on a little bit of what everyone has said. And so, yeah, I'll just leave that there and pose it to the group.
I don't want to get used to this. Sorry, I don't want to get used to everything. I want to be a person that still feels pain when there are injustices happening in this country. I think Glennon Doyle said something on a podcast of basically like, those of us that are having the hardest time or the saddest time or the most angry time, there's a spot from where things are to where we'd like for them to be. And as that gap gets bigger, the pain is there. Our job is to try and make that gap smaller. And that's what all of us on the screen are doing, to try and close this gap so that the place from what things are right now to the utopian world we'd love to see one day isn't this giant vortex of a Grand Canyon. And so for me, I don't want to be prepared for anything. I still want things to make me feel things. I'd rather feel everything than nothing right now. And so I would just say, everyone says, what's the one thing we can do? Self-care. You can take care of yourself through this, because if you burn out and you cannot function in this society that we're living in right now, that's where things start to fall apart. Take time off. We do it on the podcast, every single one of us. And it's not like work for 4 months and then take a day. Take time every single day to recalibrate yourself, make sure your feet on the ground, go outside and touch grass and just breathe, because this is going to be a long fight. It's going to be a long fight.
It's going to be a marathon for sure. And Joe, regarding John Bolton, I don't think we should hold him up as the poster boy for the rule of law in this country. Definitely not a good rally point.
Definitely not.
Not a good rallying point. There's better ways to reach across the aisle. And like Heather said, you go 3 feet deep and you find out there's no support for any of this. And I always bring this up, and I keep thinking of Professor Jelani Cobb, who I heard say, I think it was to Chris Hayes, he was talking about the Fugitive Slave Act during the Civil War, and how the feds were coming in and taking people's neighbors and taking members of the community away under the Fugitive Slave Act. And people were really upset about that. Everybody on both sides of the aisle were really upset about that. And they asked him, Professor, is it because they're abolitionists? Is it because they're leftist, woke Marxists? And he's like, no, it's because the most fundamental civic unit in our country is the neighbor, is neighbor. And when people start coming in and effing with our neighbors and the people in our communities, that is when that's when you go 3 feet deep and you see nobody likes this. And that's why I think he's upside down on so many of these things. And so as long as we focus on community and make sure that everybody knows what's happening to our neighbors and our community members, I think that's how we start to really get a huge coalition of people to push back against this.
Yeah, I also think, to Heather's point, that MAGA was always a group of different groups of people cobbled together. It's the far-right Christians, it's the techno bros, it's the racists that were psyched that they could finally be that. It was the misogynists. It was, old school conservatives that wanted to just revert to a different time. But they're not actually a cohesive unit. And if they lose their figurehead, if as what's her name on her brilliant podcast calls him, if Kanks goes down, she calls him Kanks. If Kanks goes down, is JD able to hold the mantle long enough for those people to stay together? Because ultimately JD is just a stand-in for the tech bros. He's a puppet for that group of people. Those people are working really hard with the Christian nationalists, I think, hand in hand with the Project 2025 Christian nationalists, the Heritage Foundation guys, and the techno bros to kind of take over the world before they lose Kanks. And I think that we have to start. I know, it's so freaking funny. She's so hilarious. Why can't I think of her name right now?
Kango's McTaco Tits. That's a full proper.
She's a funny broad. It's my favorite kind of woman. But I think the thing is, can we hold it together, or can we poke enough holes in that collective before they really establish power? I think it's why they're working as hard as they can, as fast as they can, to really establish authoritarianism, so that it won't matter if Trump is gone, so that they will already have the wheels of power. Do you agree with that, Heather?
100%, 100%. And,
Yeah.
and I do think it's interesting that we are not directing much animosity toward people like Stephen Miller or Russell Vought or, the other people calling the shots, because they are actually quite vulnerable. And if we pulled at them, the whole organization would be significantly weaker. To go back to Joe's point, though, about becoming accustomed to this, I have not become accustomed to any of this. If anything, I have become much angrier and much more firmly rooted in what this country should stand for. And I am much more inclined to have zero patience with those people who are entertaining any of this at all, and to know with absolute certainty that people like us are standing on the right side of humanity, but also on the right side of history, makes me feel like we are stronger than ever, no matter what happens going forward. They will write history books about this period, and I sure would prefer to be on this side of the ledger than on the one with Stephen Miller.
Well said.
That is an absolutely perfect way to end this conversation, one I hope is part of an ongoing, never-ending conversation, because to Dana's original point, this has filled my cup. I'll use those words, they're mine, but this has filled my cup and made me feel, for the first time in a long time, I'm an ugly crier because I'm an ugly crier, like I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. So don't ugly cry, as my son calls me. He got his braces off today. Sorry. Thank you.
Ugly cry. Do it. It's beautiful.
I gotta say, like, guys, this really feels like meeting the moment in a way I haven't felt throughout all of this. Sorry.
No, Joe, this is a very lonely time for anyone paying attention.
Yes.
It's a very lonely time, and it's a demoralizing time, because the cruelty is overwhelming, and you can't believe that it's not just being stopped. You can't believe that every institution that you counted on and that you believed in hasn't stopped this already. And it starts to make you feel like you're helpless and alone. And it's nice sometimes to know that you are not alone, even if you're feeling helpless.
Yeah. And that's what all of you. Sorry, Dina.
There's no such thing as an ugly crier. Anyone who's crying is beautiful. It's the people that don't have the capacity. Those are the ones that freak me out.
Yeah, like Stephen sleeps in a coffin with ice patients in their blankets.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please, I would love to do this again. You have no idea how much this has meant. And sorry about the audio in the beginning, friends. I can't explain it. It was a weird YouTube glitch or something. Heather Cox Richardson, Dana Goldberg, Allison Gill, Lee McGowan. This has been the Siren Podcast. I am blessed and honored to have been joined by all of you. And boy, we're going to be posting clips and posting full episode of this. Thank you, everyone who's joined and was patient with the audio. Thank you so much, everyone. Truly, thank you.
You're incredible.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, team.